Good morning. It is Wednesday, November 28th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. And this is a show for the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And I wanted to play a clip for you from OAN, a network. I think it's a network on the internet, but it is Tipping Point, and Liz Wheeler is the lady.
Welcome back. One final point before we go tonight. If you are criticizing First Lady Melania Trump's Christmas trees for being oppressive or dipped in the blood of children, you need to get a life. Seriously. If you think Melania Trump's Christmas trees are a pressing problem in our nation, when thousands of migrants are storming our border and attacking our law enforcement officers, you need to get a life. This is just ridiculous. Some magazine that's supposedly about interior decorating wrote a piece hacking the First Lady's White House Christmas decorations saying, and I quote here, "Another year in the Trump White House, another opportunity to add a touch of holiday magic to the banality of evil." The magazine said the overwhelming feeling of dread was one of the many sources of inspiration for this year's decorations. Last year, the White House had white trees, and guess what? These nutty leftists said that was a symbol of white supremacy. Get a life. If you think Christmas trees colored like snow is about race, but you ignore Asia Bibi, a Pakistani woman being targeted by mobs of Islamist men because she refuses to renounce her Christian beliefs and become Muslim instead, I don't know a more diplomatic way to say it, you are not a nice person. The Islamist men want to behead Asia Bibi for being Christian, but yeah, Melania's Christmas trees are a sign of oppression. Get a life. If you think red trees are somehow a sign of authoritarianism, when you literally voted for a socialist like Bernie Sanders, you need to get a life. If you think decorating for Christmas is a sign of the banality of evil, when Democrats glorified the domestic terror group Antifa because Antifa is anti-Trump just like the left, you're a loser. When 1 million unborn babies are aborted every year, when radical leftists are trying to squash our Second Amendment rights, when women business owners here in the United States are threatened by the government that their businesses are going to be shut down if they don't celebrate gay marriage, which is against their religious beliefs, when tens of millions of Americans are paying cripplingly high premiums for the Obamacare disaster that we didn't want in the first place, when the Democrats have completely abandoned the rule of law and wanted to convict Judge Brett Kavanaugh without any proof, when socialists are the new cool part of the Democratic Party, meanwhile, Venezuela, who just tried socialism in the 21st century, and now their people can't even get toilet paper and are literally starving to death, if you still think Melania's Christmas trees are the problem in our country, you need to get a life. And that is my final point. You can reach me on Twitter at Liz_Wheeler. If you liked the show, please send me an email at oann.com/contact. In the meantime, catch us here tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. And until then, have a good night.
Want to see more videos like this?
Anyways, that was Tipping Point with Liz Wheeler, and normally I like what she has to say in this particular case, and I like what she had to say here because it gives me the opportunity to use it to illustrate the point that I'm trying to make about so-called conservatives, like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, and even Liz Wheeler, who pretends to be a conservative. They're not conservative, they're reactionary. And this little clip is proof of it. She tells people, well, if you're upset about the Christmas trees, you need to get a life. Well, if you're going to comment on the fact that people don't like her Christmas trees, you need to get a life, Miss Wheeler. Quit being a reactionary and start dealing with issues like you explained in your piece. You explained in your piece. There's many other things that are worth talking about, worth analyzing, instead of Melania Trump's Christmas trees. First of all. Second thing is, even if there was something to the Christmas tree controversy, alleged controversy, the claim that was made by the magazine was arbitrary. They offer no definitions of their terms, and they offer no evidence or proof to back their claims that it's some kind of a heinous activity going on. And so when you argue about that, you validate it. The only proper thing to do here, if you have to at all say something about this, is say, this is an arbitrary claim, and I'm going to ignore it. Okay? Best thing to do is ignore it out entirely and talk about something that's important. There's 10,000 immigrants, or potential immigrants, I should say they're emigrants, but potential immigrants at the border. And some of them have been getting violent. Isn't that something that's worth discussing? Or, as Liz Wheeler noted, there's 1 million abortions going on. There's problems in Venezuela. All of those things would be better talked about than Melania Trump's Christmas trees. And for another reason, it's that Ms. Wheeler is wrong, and that is because Melania Trump, believe it or not, I know that Ms. Wheeler is going to find this hard to believe, but Melania Trump has a staff. Melania Trump can handle criticism on her own. Melania Trump is an adult. Melania Trump has handled and dealt with lots of criticism since she's gotten into the White House. Okay. And if she and her staff can't handle the criticism, then her husband, the President of the United States, has a staff and others that can. A lawyer, the former mayor of the city of New York, Rudy Giuliani, that can also help her out if she's struggling to help herself. This is why I don't want to bother with a lot of the things that are going on in Washington, D.C., unless it helps to illustrate a particular point, because these folks have, the President of the United States has, what kind of a budget does the White House have? Tens of millions, hundreds of millions. They have a staff. They have cabinet secretaries at their disposal. There's no reason to leap to their defense. It's just not necessary. Let them defend themselves. And if you're going to, you want to go after socialists, again, the best thing to do is go after the socialists that are in your life, your neighbors, your relatives, the people you meet at the grocery store, at the soccer field, that kind of thing. Those are the people that you really need to deal with. And skip the Christmas tree so-called controversy. So, well, when I come back, I'm going to, we're going to take a look at the Rush Limbaugh show in a minute. And thank you very much. And this is a clip from the Rush Limbaugh show that I got from his app, from rushlimbaugh.com.
Man, oh man, is Trump mad at General Motors and Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors. He's livid. Closing some factories, one of them in Detroit. And he's just adamant that they close factories in China. And, of course, this sent the drive-bys out to try to get some sound. We have a couple of Democrats claiming this just proves Trump's been a phony from the get-go. Capitalism is not the way to save, fading jobs. Trump's not done anything for anybody, and General Motors is the proof that Trump's been a phony. Well, the Christmas season is, I guess you could say it's officially here. We're still on.
There we go. Oh, hate it when I have to struggle to shut that off. But anyways, so about the General Motors controversy, the thing I want to say about that is that, again, it's the left that dictates politics and political definitions. The left is the one that decided who's on the left and who's on the right. And again, one of the issues here in regards to definitions or political definitions, the left has said that if you're a conservative, then you must be a free trader. And there is no such thing. If free trade, properly understood, means that there are absolutely no barriers in any country in the world to people's goods and services. Okay, that people are free to sell their products in any country they want to, in any way they want to. Then there is no such thing as free trade. There's never been any such thing as free trade. And as far as I can see, there'll never be any such thing as free trade as long as we have countries with their own governments. The only way, and I've said this before, that we're going to have free trade on this planet is if we have one world government. Okay? And so this is a good way for the left to get, and that one world government basically means socialism. That's what socialism ultimately is. One world government, it's all run by socialists, and there's no borders, and that's socialist paradise, right? Everybody trades freely amongst each other and has a great time, allegedly. Anyhow, so one world government, that's not conservative by a long shot, but you have conservatives that are running around trying to promote free trade, trying to suggest that that such a thing has existed or can exist, when it is obvious it can't, as long as we have different countries, because every country has its own interests. One of the things that you happen with free trade is, let's say that's happened with other countries, they bring their products to the United States to sell in the United States, but what the governments do is they subsidize those products so that the manufacturer of those products can sell them in the United States at a lower price than the domestic competition, undercutting domestic producers. So that's where you end up getting tariffs. Then the United States says, well, that's not fair, and wants to go ahead and put tariffs on the products to make them competitive. But the point is that the United States is, as Donald Trump has rightfully said, going to be concerned with the United States and United States workers. Japan is going to be concerned with Japanese workers. The Russians with Russians, China with Chinese, etc., etc. The only thing that you can hope for is trade deals, and having good trade deals that are balanced and fair. You have to have those kinds of things, because that's the realistic way to look at it. Every country is going to operate in its own self-interest, as President Trump has acknowledged. That he says the United States is going to be about the United States, and the rest of the world is free to do the same. Okay, and that means we're not going to be pushing for free trade. Okay, we're going to be pushing for trade deals that are as beneficial and as fair to us as it is to the other party or parties. That's what it means. So, and again, this is where the conservatives get it mixed up. They think, well, in order to be a conservative, I'm supposed to be a free trader. No, you're not. You're supposed to think. Your job isn't to stand athwart history and yell stop. It's to stand athwart history and yell prove it. And as far as trade is concerned, like I said, it'll never happen unless we do end up with some kind of socialist paradise, which will never happen either. So until then, the best that we can hope for is equitable trade deals so that our workers, our products have a fair shot in the world market. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the Ayn Rand lexicon. Thank you very much. And today's word or concept, because Ayn Rand lexicon is all about concepts and essentials rather than accidentals. And the concept of the day is creation. The power to rearrange the combinations of natural elements is the only creative power man possesses. It is an enormous and glorious power, and it is the only meaning of the concept creative. Creation does not, and metaphysically cannot, mean the power to bring something into existence out of nothing. Creation means the power to bring into existence an arrangement or combination or integration of natural elements that had not existed before. This is true of any human product, scientific or aesthetic. Man's imagination is nothing more than the ability to rearrange the things he has observed in reality. The best and briefest identification of man's power in regard to nature is Francis Bacon's, quote, "Nature to be commanded must be obeyed," unquote. In this context, to be commanded means to be made to serve man's purposes. To be obeyed means that they cannot be served unless man discovers the properties of natural elements and uses them accordingly. Good stuff there. And there really isn't much to comment on about creation. I think it's an excellent definition. It gets right to the point, gets right to the heart of the matter. And again, it's about the essences of concepts. Very often the left is going to try and define terms by their accidents, by their qualities, quantities, that kind of thing, rather than getting to the essences and defining them by their essences. Back in a minute. All right, thank you very much. And next is the book by Tammy Bruce called The Death of Right and Wrong. And as I've explained before, we're not going to end up with the death of right and wrong. We're just going to end up with a different set of rights and wrongs. Because anytime the socialists take over, it's not a free-for-all. It's not that everybody gets to do whatever they want. They still have a society that's bound by rules. It's just now done by socialist or socialistic rules. And we're in the part of the chapter that's called When Good Organizations Go Bad. She had been talking about Andrea Yates, who had killed her children, and how that was it was mishandled by the American judicial system. It wasn't always this way with NOW. When I joined the organization in 1986, I was attracted by its history of correcting actual wrongs against women. Changes spearheaded by NOW in the 1960s and 1970s benefit women across the board, regardless of political affiliation. Some of you may not remember that it was not until 1973, after a 5-year campaign by NOW, including 3.5 years of litigation of a NOW complaint, that the U.S. Supreme Court finally issued a ruling prohibiting sex-segregated employment advertisements. I kid you not, it took a lawsuit, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the U.S. Supreme Court. But because of NOW's work, when your daughter or wife or sister is looking for a job, she now can apply for whatever job she wants, not just for things determined to be women's work. It was only in 1970 that United Airlines halted its men-only executive flights between New York and Chicago, which NOW had protested as a form of sex discrimination in public accommodations. That same year, NOW chapters in California lobbied for a bill introduced in the California legislature to permit girls to work as newspaper deliverers at the same age as boys. Until then, state law allowed boys to begin delivering newspapers at age 10, but girls only at age 18. Girls were not allowed as pages in Congress until NOW intervened. These may seem like simple things, but I chose them among so many other successes to give you a sense of the absurd situation that existed at the time of NOW's founding in 1966. To those of you who are too young to remember that situation, it probably seems incomprehensible to you. Things changed for the better because of NOW, because of feminists. Over the last 2 decades, things have changed again, and not for the better. While in 1970, NOW rushed in to halt those United Airlines men-only flights, in 2001, the Houston area chapter of NOW rushed in to establish the Andrea Pia Yates Support Coalition. Part of its mission was to collect money for a legal defense fund set up by Yates's lawyers. The group also provided courtroom supporters for Yates and held candlelight vigils on her behalf. I was president of Los Angeles NOW from 1990 to 1996. During my presidency, we, too, organized coalitions, offered courtroom support, and held candlelight vigils. But our efforts were on behalf of women who were victims of violence. Never would I have thought, even in the age of the death of right and wrong, that a NOW chapter would be defiling those legitimate activist tools to help a murderer. This rallying around postpartum depression, of all things, strongly suggests an anti-childbirth and even anti-child attitude in the modern feminist movement. Certainly not an authentic feminist approach. This is, however, reflective of a movement that desires the complete extirpation of any role for men in women's lives. You see, with men come marriage and children, hopefully in that order, and with children come many women choose to lead lives not sanctioned by professional feminists. Putting family first, children and husband, is the ultimate blasphemy and must be fought against. That fight includes painting childbirth and the pressures of motherhood as something that drives women mad. Literally. So, but I wanted to note that the progresses that now made that Tammy Bruce was noting were progresses in terms of power. It had been a tradition, let's say, in Congress for pages to be male and not female. So what? The only reason that now wants women to be able to be pages in Congress is for power. It's, again, a power-oriented situation, looking at things in terms of winning and losing rather than looking at them in terms of right and wrong. And so I say that the whole organization, the whole National Organization for Women organization, has been about power and ignoring what's right and what's wrong since its inception. The other thing is that with what she doesn't understand about now, and a lot of conservatives don't understand about the left, is that they have an overarching purpose, and that is socialist paradise. That's what they're headed for. They really don't care about the short-term goals. They don't care about whether or not women will get the right to vote. They don't care about any of those so-called women's issues. Women's issues are simply used as a wedge to create friction in our society, to agitate for complete reform, i.e. revolution, with the idea of ushering in socialist paradise. So, from that perspective, when you have victories for now, that's a loss for the organization. When they go to court and they actually get the courts to overturn this, that, or the other thing, or agrees with them in any way, shape, or form, that's not a victory for the organization considered as a socialist organization. It is a setback, because with that victory comes complacency. The biggest enemy the left has is complacency. Women then are going to sit back, and instead of continuing to be avant-garde revolutionaries, pushing for revolutionary change, as these goals are met, they're going to become more and more complacent. They're going to sit back and say, wow, isn't this wonderful that we can now be pages, that we can go looking for jobs in the same want ads section that the men do, that we can fly on the same planes that the men do. So the left has to come up with something else. The Now organization needs to come up with things that are new. It's like the same thing with the Civil Rights Act in 1965. When it went through, that wasn't a victory for the left. It was a defeat, because it takes away their main criticism. One of the big criticisms of this country is that it's racist. It's inherently racist. And as long as they can show this country to be racist, they can maintain social friction, maintain pressure for revolutionary change. But when a law is passed that says, no, we're going to put racism aside, we're going to get rid of Jim Crow, the pressure is off. Now the people of the United States, particularly conservatives, can say, look what a great country we are. We don't need a revolution in this country. We're so great, we can look at ourselves in a critical manner, and we can make necessary changes. So now what you end up with in terms of racial situation is we're going back to the 60s, and instead of pushing for racial equality, diversity, inclusion, now it's going the other direction. Exclusion. The promotion of, particularly on college campuses, of each race having its own place to live. There's many campuses in which if you're African American, you are allowed to live in strictly African American dormitories. You don't have to mix with anyone else. If you're Hispanic, you can live in an all-Hispanic dormitory. In the 60s, organizations, civil rights organizations, fought against segregation. Now, those same organizations promote segregation. Why? Because it creates friction. And that's what they're about. They don't give a damn about whether or not we all get along and we intermarry and, that kind of thing. They don't give a damn about that. They want socialist paradise. The whole planet, one world government, that kind of thing. So, other than that, like I said, she kind of misses the overall point, but other than that, she makes she paints the picture very well, and also what she's bringing to this is her own personal experience, where she can give insight into what it's actually like to be a lefty, to be a person from a NOW organization, and that's something that Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity et al. Can't do and don't do, even though they claim to. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from David Horowitz's book, The Black Book of the American Left. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back. And I'm now going to be in the part 2, Reflections on the Left. I skipped a couple of chapters because they were kind of, they were autobiographical. It's about who he was and who is Peter Collier, who has helped him writing some of the chapters in part 2. Chapter 1 of part 2 is called Goodbye to All That. And the part 2 is called Reflections on the Left. When we tell our old radical friends that we voted for Ronald Reagan last November, the response is usually one of annoyed incredulity. After making sure that we are not putting them on, our old friends make nervous jokes about Jerry Falwell and Phyllis Schlafly, about gods that have failed, about aging yuppies ascending to consumer heaven in their BMWs. We remind them of an old adage: anyone under 40 who isn't a socialist has no heart. Anyone over 40 who is a socialist has no brain. Inevitably, the talk becomes bitter. One old comrade, after a tirade in which she had denounced us as reactionaries and crypto-fascists, finally sputtered, "The worst thing is that you've turned your back on the 60s. And by the way, not crypto-fascists, but they are reactionaries." That was exactly right. Casting our ballots for Ronald Reagan was indeed a way of finally saying goodbye to all that, to the self-aggrandizing romance with corrupt third worldism, to the casual indulgence of Soviet totalitarianism, to the hypocritical and self-dramatizing anti-Americanism, which is the New Left's bequest to mainstream politics. The instruments of popular culture may perhaps be forgiven for continuing to portray the 60s as a time of infectious idealism, but those of us who were active then have no excuse for abetting this banality. If in some ways it was the best of times, it was also the worst of times, an era of bloodthirsty fantasies as well as spiritual ones. We ourselves experienced both aspects, starting as civil rights and anti-war activists, and ending as co-editors of the New Left magazine Ramparts. The magazine Post allowed us to write about the rough beast slouching through America, and also to urge it on through non-editorial activities we thought of as clandestine, until we later read about them in the FBI and CIA files we both accumulated. Like other radicals in those days, we were against electoral politics, regarding voting as one of those charades used by the ruling class to legitimate its power. We were even more against Reagan, then governor of California, having been roughed up by his troopers during the People's Park demonstrations in Berkeley and tear-gassed by his National Guard helicopters during the University of California's Third World Liberation Front strike. But neither elections nor elected officials seem particularly important compared with the auguries of revolution the left saw everywhere by the end of the decade. In the way the nefarious Richard Nixon was widening the war in Indochina, in the unprovoked attacks by paramilitary police against the Black Panther Party, in the formation of the Weather Underground, a group willing to pick up the gun or the bomb. It was a time when the apocalypse struggling to be born seemed to need only the slightest assist from the radical midwife. When we were in the voting booth this past November, in different precincts but of the same mind, we both thought back to the day in 1969 when Tom Hayden came by the office and, after getting a Ramparts donation to buy gas masks and other combat issue for Black Panther guerrillas, announced portentously, "Fascism is here, and we're all going to be in jail by the end of the year." We agreed wholeheartedly with this apocalyptic vision and in fact had just written an editorial. Quote, "The system cannot be revitalized. It must be overthrown as humanely as possible, but by any means necessary." Unquote. Every thought and perception in those days was filtered through the dark and distorting glass of the Vietnam War. The left was hooked on Vietnam. It was an addictive drug whose rush was a potent mix of melodrama, self-importance, and moral rectitude. Vietnam was a universal solvent, the explanation for every evil everyone saw, and the justification for every excess we committed. Trashing the windows of merchants and on the main streets of America seemed warranted by the notion that these petty bourgeois shopkeepers were cogs in the system of capitalist exploitation that was obliterating Vietnam. Fantasizing the death of local cops seemed warranted by the role they played as an occupying army in America's black ghettos. Those many Vietnams we yearned to see explode in domestic wars of liberation. Vietnam caused us to acquire a new appreciation for foreign tyrants like Kim Il-sung of North Korea. Vietnam also caused us to support the domestic extortionism and violence of groups like the Black Panthers, and to dismiss derisively Martin Luther King Jr. as an, quote, Uncle Tom, unquote. The left has conveniently forgotten this fact now that it finds it expedient to invoke King's name and reputation to further its domestic politics. How naive was the new left can be debated, but by the end of the 60s, we were not political novices. We knew that bad news from Southeast Asia, the reports of bogged-down campaigns, and the weekly body counts announced by Walter Cronkite was good for the radical agenda. The more repressive our government in dealing with dissent at home, the more recruits for our cause, and the sooner the appearance of the revolutionary Armageddon. Our assumption that Vietnam would be the political and moral fulcrum by which we would tip this country toward revolution foresaw every possibility except one, that the United States would pull out. Never had we thought that the United States, the arch-imperial power, would of its own volition withdraw from Indochina. This development violated a primary article of our hand-me-down Marxism, that political action through normal channels could not alter the course of the war. The system we had wanted to overthrow worked tardily and only at great cost, but it worked. When American troops finally came home, some of us took the occasion to begin a long and painful re-examination of our political assumptions and beliefs. Others did not. For the diehards, there was a post-Vietnam syndrome in its own way as debilitating as that suffered by people who had fought there. A sense of emptiness rather than exhilaration, a paradoxical desire to hold on to and breathe life back into the experience that had been their high for so many years. And I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there. And again, another excellent glimpse into what it's like to be a lefty, and looking at the 60s and the Vietnam War from a left-wing perspective. I grew up during the Vietnam War. The first 15 years of my life was you'd turn on the television to watch the news, and you would get news, weather, sports, and the Vietnam War every day for 15 years, for the first 15 years of my life. When the Vietnam War ended, I was shocked because I assumed that it would never end. And just as a matter of fact, just like David Horowitz and his buddies assumed that it would never end either. I didn't, and I was too young to know anything about to understand the struggles and this revolutionary activities that were going on and what the aims of these people were. You'd see the news articles or about what various left-wing organizations were doing and protests and whatnot. But as a kid, you really didn't understand very much of it. So, but again, I remembered that when it did end, I was shocked because for the first time in my life, it wasn't going to be news, weather, sports, and the Vietnam War. Vietnam War was over. So it was a rather shocking development for me. In any case, this brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you for listening and have a great day.